Usually when we talk about machines, physical mechanisms, there is this underlying expectation of a single immutable purpose.
Right. Yeah.
Like you look at a toaster and its physical form dictates exactly what it does. It toasts.
Yeah, you can't use it to check your email.
Exactly. The heating elements, the springs, the slots, they all serve that one goal.
Mm-hmm.
Or you look at a car engine and the pistons and spark plugs are arranged to create forward motion. For most of human history, the hardware was basically the destiny of the machine.
The physical structure and the function were just completely locked together. I mean, to change what the machine did, you had to physically rebuild the machine itself.
But then you step into the world of computation,
Right.
into the digital reality that we all live in today, and suddenly that fundamental rule of physical reality is completely broken.
Oh, completely shattered.
Yeah, think about the device you are listening to this on right now.
Mm.
We're carrying around these little slabs of glass and rare earth metals in our pockets that act as a match 1 second, a movie theater the next, a bank a moment later, and then a communication device after that.
Right.
We are looking at a landscape where the machine is essentially anything it needs to be.
It operates as the ultimate blank slate. And the theoretical foundation of that blank slate, the very mathematics that allow a single physical object to hold infinite potential functions, is what we are exploring today.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we have a mission, and it's a massive one. We're going to unpack how a single, highly abstract, 36-page mathematics paper published in 1936 became the literal blueprint for the entire modern digital age.
It's wild to think about.
It really is. From that smartphone in your pocket, to the giant server farms running the global internet, to the artificial intelligence models currently reshaping our world.
And our source material for this exploration is an extensive, incredibly detailed biographical and scientific overview of the mind behind that paper, Alan Turing.
Yes.
It's a remarkable set of sources, honestly. It bridges pure abstract mathematics, the visceral, life and death reality of World War II code breaking, and eventually the fundamental biological patterns of life itself.
Okay, let's unpack this, because here is the real hook for you as you're listening. Before Alan Turing built physical machines to crack Nazi codes, and way before he was writing papers debating whether computers could possess artificial consciousness, he had to invent the very concept of a computer out of thin air.
Yeah, he started from zero.
Literally zero. And he didn't do it to build a gadget or start a tech company. He did it to solve an impossible, purely theoretical math problem.
He was attempting to answer a question about the absolute limits of truth and logic in the universe.
Wow.
Yeah, the fact that the modern digital world fell out of that purely theoretical pursuit is, well, it's perhaps one of the greatest accidental byproducts in human history.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
But to really understand how we got from theoretical logic to the digital age, we can't just start with the math. We have to start with the mind that produced it and the emotional crucible that forged his perspective.
Absolutely.
So Alan Turing was born in London in 1912 into a family steeped in the British Empire establishment. His father worked in the Indian Civil Service, and his grandfather had been a general in the Bengal Army. Because his parents were constantly traveling between the UK and India, Turing's early life was, well, highly unusual.
It was very disjointed. Turing and his older brother John were frequently left in the care of a retired army couple in Hastings. So from a very early age, you see a life characterized by a significant degree of isolation.
Right.
But nature abhors a vacuum, and Turing filled that isolation with a profound, self-directed curiosity about how the physical world operated. The sources highlight a specific book he discovered in 1922 called Natural Wonders Every Child Should Know.
Oh, I saw that, by Edwin Tenney Brewster, right?
That's the one. Turing later credited this book with opening his eyes to the idea that the human body itself was a complex machine.
That concept of the body as a machine is going to become incredibly important later on, and that scientific spark caught fast. By the time he was attending a primary school called St. Michael's, his head mistress actually went on the record with his parents.
Yeah, she was quite blunt.
She literally stated that she had clever boys and hard-working boys, but Alan is a genius.
High praise.
But what strikes me, though, isn't just the raw intelligence the sources describe. It's the sheer, uncompromising determination when he set his mind to something.
Oh, the bicycle journey is the perfect illustration of that determination.
It is unbelievable. Picture this, you're listening. It's 1926. Turing is 13 years old. He's supposed to start his first term at Sherborne School. which is an independent boarding school in Dorset.
Huh.
But his first day of term happens to coincide perfectly with the 1926 general strike in Britain.
Right. Millions of workers walked out.
Exactly. The train networks are completely shut down. I mean, most 13-year-olds, and frankly, most parents, would just say, well, the trains are down. I guess we're staying home until the strike is over.
Yeah, free holiday. But Turing viewed the transportation collapse not as a roadblock, but simply as a missing variable in an equation he needed to solve.
Yes.
He needed to be at Sherborne. The trains were zero. Therefore, he had to provide the locomotion himself.
So he gets on his bicycle and rides 60 miles, completely unaccompanied, from Southampton to Sherborne. A 13-year-old boy navigating the country roads of 1920s England alone.
It's just wild.
And he even stops overnight at an inn by himself, books a room, and continues the next day.
What that reveals about his internal drive is crucial. I mean, when he set his mind on a goal, conventional obstacles simply vanished from his reasoning. However, that singular hyperlogical focus created significant friction within the educational system of the time.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, the British public school system in the 1920s placed a massive, almost exclusive emphasis on the classics. You know, Latin, ancient Greek, literature, theology. Science was often viewed as a secondary, almost blue-collar pursuit.
Right. The headmaster at Sherborne actually wrote a rather scathing letter to Turing's parents. He complained that if Alan simply wanted to be a scientific specialist, he was wasting his time at a public school. The establishment wanted him to be educated in the classical gentlemanly sense.
Meanwhile, Turing was in the back of the classroom, secretly solving advanced mathematical problems without even having studied elementary calculus yet.
Just casual genius things.
Exactly. By the time he was 16, he was independently engaging with Albert Einstein's work. The sources suggest he didn't just understand Einstein's theories of relativity, but he actually deduced Einstein's questioning of Newton's laws of motion from a text where that critique wasn't even explicitly stated.
Wait, really?
Yeah, he was capable of reading the structural logic between the lines of the universe.
That is staggering. But the universe is also chaotic and cruel. And this brings us to a profound emotional pivot in his early life. While at Sherborne, Turing meets another slightly older pupil named Christopher Morcom. The sources describe Morcom as Turing's first love, and the depth of their connection cannot be overstated.
No, it really can't. It was a relationship built on a shared, intense intellectual passion. They bonded over complex science, mathematics, astronomy.
Right.
For a mind like Turing's, which was so far ahead of its peers that he often struggled to communicate his thoughts, finding Christopher must have been an absolute revelation. Morcom could actually speak Turing's language. He could match his brilliance and challenge him.
But it was cut short in the most devastating way imaginable. In February 1930, Morcom tragically dies from complications of bovine tuberculosis.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is. It turns out he had contracted the disease years earlier from drinking infected cow's milk. It's just a random, senseless physical failure of the biological machine that takes away this extraordinary mind.
And the grief Turing experienced was immense. And the way he processed that grief set the trajectory for his entire life's work.
How so?
Well, we can see the mechanics of his mourning through a series of deeply philosophical letters he wrote to Christopher Morcom's mother, Frances. He expressed a feeling of immense duty, telling her that he had to put as much energy into his own work as if Christopher were still alive, because he felt compelled to carry Christopher's brilliant potential forward.
The contents of those letters are staggering when you think about where his career ends up. He starts grappling with the dualism of the mind and the body.
Right.
He writes to Frances, theorizing that the spirit is really eternally connected with matter. He talks about how when the body is alive, the spirit and the matter are firmly linked. But when the body dies, he uses a very specific word. He says the mechanism of the body is gone, and so the spirit has to detach and find a new mechanism to inhabit.
Using the word mechanism to describe human biology in the early 1930s is a profound choice of words. He is actively grappling with the ultimate philosophical problem of consciousness. He is asking, how does a physical substrate, flesh, blood, neurons, hold something as abstract and weightless as a mind or a soul?
So what does this all mean for his later work? It's almost as if Turing's intense grief acted as a hyper-focusing lens. To cope with the incomprehensible loss of Christopher's brilliant mind, Turing became entirely obsessed with understanding how a physical mechanism could contain a thought.
Exactly.
If a biological machine could house an intelligence, what other kinds of machines could do the same?
That framing aligns perfectly with the progression of his research. This wasn't just a grieving teenager seeking spiritual comfort. This was the genesis of his lifelong obsession with the relationship between the physical world and the abstract mind. He was trying to find Christopher's mind in the machinery of the universe.
Wow.
And that relentless quest takes him from Sherborne to King's College, Cambridge in 1931.
Cambridge in the 1930s was the absolute center of the mathematical universe.
No.
And Turing arrives there ready to engage with the heaviest concepts of the era. His time at Cambridge really cemented his reputation as a formidable, if highly unconventional, thinker. Let's look at his dissertation, for example. He decides to tackle something called the central limit theorem.
Right. And to give you an idea of what that is, the central limit theorem is a foundational concept in probability theory. Simply put, it establishes that in many situations, when independent random variables are added together, their properly normalized sum tends toward a normal distribution, what we commonly call a bell curve.
Okay.
This happens even if the original variables themselves are not normally distributed.
So if I roll a standard six-sided die, the chances of getting any number from 1 to 6 are flat. It's a uniform distribution.
Yeah.
But if I roll a 50 dice and add up the sum, and I do that thousands of times, the distribution of those sums is going to form a beautiful, predictable bell curve, clustering around the average.
Exactly. It's the mathematical magic that creates order out of randomness. Proving exactly why and how that happens mathematically is incredibly complex. And Turing chose to prove a version of this theorem for his fellowship dissertation.
And here's where we see the classic Turing irony. He spends all this time, creates this brilliant, highly complex mathematical proof, submits it to the committee, and then finds out what?
He discovers that a Finnish mathematician named Jarl Waldemar Lindeberg had already proven the exact same theorem a full decade earlier in 1922.
Oh, man.
Yeah, Turing had been completely unaware of Lindeberg's work.
He spent months painstakingly charting a course across the ocean, only to find someone else's flag already planted on the beach.
Okay.
You would think the Cambridge committee would reject the dissertation, right? I mean, he didn't discover anything new.
But they didn't reject it. They awarded him the fellowship anyway. The reason they did so speaks to the core of Turing's genius. The committee looked past the final destination and examined the path he took to get there. His methods were so astonishingly original and his mathematical logic so uniquely constructed that the committee noted if Turing's work had been published first, it would have been heralded as a major revolutionary event in mathematical literature.
He didn't just walk down the established paved road of mathematical convention. He hacked his own entirely new path through the jungle.
Exactly.
And having proven that he could navigate the densest underbrush of probability, he sets his sights on the biggest, most terrifying jungle in 1930s mathematics, the Entscheidungsproblem.
Yes, the Entscheidungsproblem. It translates from German as the decision problem. This was posed in 1928 by the legendary German mathematician David Hilbert. And to understand the immense weight of this problem, you have to understand the existential crisis that mathematics was enduring at that exact moment in history.
Right, mathematics wasn't just solving equations. Mathematicians were trying to prove that the entire system of math was structurally sound. They wanted to prove that math was perfect.
Hilbert had proposed a sweeping agenda known as Hilbert's program. He wanted to ground all existing mathematical theories to a finite, complete set of axioms and provide a proof that these axioms were consistent. He wanted absolute certainty.
Which makes sense.
It does. But in 1931, a mathematician named Kurt Gödel dropped a bombshell on the academic world with his incompleteness theorems.
Gödel's incompleteness theorems basically stated that any logical system complex enough to do basic arithmetic will always contain true statements that can never ever be proven within that system.
Right, and the best way to visualize Gödel's proof is the classic liar's paradox.
Oh, I love this one.
Yeah, if I say to you, the statement is false, what is it? If the statement is true, then it must be false. But if it is false, then the statement is telling the truth, which makes it true. It creates an infinite, unresolvable loop. Gödel figured out a way to encode that exact type of self-referential paradox into mathematical equations.
He proved that math has blind spots built into its very DNA. It's like finding out the concrete foundation of your house has structural flaws that are impossible to fix.
Exactly. Following Gödel's devastating paper, Hilbert was trying to salvage whatever certainty he could. So he poses the Entscheidungsproblem. He asks, is there at least a definitive algorithm, a mechanical step-by-step procedure that can take any given mathematical statement and definitively prove whether it is true or false?
Think about what Hilbert is actually asking for here. He essentially wanted a magical mathematical crank.
Yeah, a magic crank.
You write a complex mathematical equation on a piece of paper, you feed it into the crank, you turn the handle, and the machine processes the symbols and spits out a piece of paper that says either true or false. No human intuition required. No creative leaps. Just pure mechanical logic evaluating truth.
Hilbert was hoping the answer was yes. Turing set out to figure out if that magical crank could even theoretically exist. And to figure out if a mechanical crank for math could exist, Turing realized he had to take a massive step backward.
I mean, what?
Well, he first had to rigorously define what mechanical actually meant. What is a machine? What is computation?
This is a crucial historical context to remember. In the early 1930s, the word computer was not an object.
No, not at all.
It was a job title. A computer was a human being, very often a woman, sitting at a desk in a room doing tedious calculations by hand, using log tables and adding machines. Computation was a human action, not a physical device.
So in 1936, Turing finishes his 36-page paper titled On Computable Numbers with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem. And in this paper, rather than just using complex algebraic formulas to answer Hilbert, Turing invents a hypothetical device in his mind. He constructs a thought experiment.
A Turing machine.
There it is.
This is the moment the digital age is conceived. But let's be absolutely clear for you as you listen to this. Turing did not build this out of metal, wires, and vacuum tubes. He built it out of pure imagination and logic.
The beauty of the Turing machine is its radical, almost insulting simplicity. He asked the mathematical community to imagine an infinitely long paper tape divided into discrete squares. Hovering over this tape is a read-write head, a scanner.
And this scanner is not a supercomputer. It can only do a handful of incredibly basic actions. It can read the symbol on the single square it is currently hovering over. It can erase that symbol. It can write a new symbol. And it can move the tape exactly one square to the left or one square to the right. That's the entire physical mechanism. Read, write, move left, move right.
But the true magic lies in the scanner's internal state of mind, which is essentially a set of instructions, a state register.
Right.
Let's say the scanner is in state A. The rulebook says, if you are in state A and you read a 1 on the tape, change it to a 0, move 1 square to the right, and change your internal state to state B.
So if it's in state B, it looks at a new rule. State B might say, if you read a 0, leave it alone, move left, and change to state C.
Exactly.
It is just blindly following a basic, rigid set of instructions based on what it sees and what state it is currently in. It's a recipe.
What Turing painstakingly proved in his 1936 paper was that this ridiculously simple hypothetical machine could perform any conceivable mathematical computation. Anything that a human computer could calculate by hand, this machine could calculate by moving its tape back and forth and changing one's nails.
That alone is wild. He proved that all mathematics can be broken down into reading, writing, moving left, and moving right. But here's the absolute genius leap. The insight that changed the world. He didn't just stop at imagining one specific machine for one specific math problem. He imagined the universal computing machine.
This concept is the philosophical crux of modern computing.
It really is.
Before this 1936 paper, the world operated on dedicated hardware. If you wanted a machine add numbers, you built an adding machine with gears and levers specifically arranged for addition. If you wanted a machine to weave a specific pattern into cloth, you built a loom with physical punch cards dictating that exact pattern.
Yeah.
The physical hardware was the software.
But Turing said, wait a minute. What if we don't build a new machine for every new problem? What if we encode the rules of a specific machine, its state table, as a string of ones and zeros, and we print those rules onto the tape itself?
He conceptualized a master machine, a blank slate device. You feed it a tape that contains the coded instructions for an adding machine, and suddenly the blank slate machine reads those instructions and functionally becomes an adding machine.
Wow.
If you take that tape out and feed it a tape containing the instructions for a word processor, it becomes a word processor.
He separated the hardware from the software. He basically invented the concept of downloading an app.
He really did.
Decades before microchips, before LCD screens, before the transistor was even a glimmer in an engineer's eye, Turing conceptualized a universal hardware device where you could download new software to completely change its fundamental function.
John von Neumann, one of the other great titans of early computing who went on to design the architecture for modern computers, explicitly acknowledged that the central concept of the modern computer came directly from Turing's 1936 paper. Turing replaced Gödel's highly complex arithmetic-based formal language with this incredibly simple, intuitive device using a tape and symbols.
But what about Hilbert's magic crank? Turing built this amazing universal machine in his mind, but did it actually solve the decision problem?
It did solve it by mathematically proving that Hilbert's dream was impossible. To demonstrate this, Turing introduced what computer scientists now call the halting problem.
This is one of the most mind-bending paradoxes in science, so let's walk through it carefully. Turing asked, can we write a universal program that can look at another program and decide if that second program will eventually finish its calculation and halt, or if it will get stuck in an infinite loop forever?
It seems like a reasonable request. You want a debugging machine, a machine that checks for infinite loops. So Turing says, let's assume this magical halt checker machine exists. You feed it any program, and it outputs either, yes, it will halt, or no, it will loop forever.
Okay, assuming we have the halt checker, how does Turing break it?
He breaks it by using Gödel's self-referential logic against the machine itself. Turing imagines writing a new malicious program. Let's call it the paradox program.
Okay.
The paradox program uses the halt checker as its core engine, but it adds a twist. The rule for the paradox program is this. If the halt checker says, I will halt, then I will intentionally go into an infinite loop. But if the halt checker says, I will loop forever, then I will immediately halt.
It's a machine designed to spite its own predictions. So what happens when you feed the paradox program into itself? What happens when you ask the halt checker to evaluate the paradox program?
The entire logical structure collapses. If the halt checker analyzes the paradox program and predicts, yes, it will halt, the paradox program's rules kick in, and it loops forever, the prediction is wrong.
Right.
If the halt checker predicts, no, it will loop forever, the paradox program immediately halts. The prediction is wrong again.
It is the ultimate "this statement is false" paradox, but physically instantiated into the logic of a machine.
Therefore, Turing mathematically proved that a universal halt checker cannot exist. You cannot algorithmically decide in advance what every program will do. And because the halting problem is undecidable, Hilbert's and Scheiding's problem has no solution. There is no magical crank that can prove all mathematics.
It's breathtaking when you step back and look at the scope of it. Turing sets out to close a highly obscure chapter in abstract mathematical logic, and in doing so, he accidentally opens the door to the entire digital universe.
Yeah, quite the accident.
By proving what machines cannot do, he laid out the exact architectural blueprint for what they could do. And having mapped out this theoretical universe, we follow Turing as he crosses the Atlantic. From September 1936 to July 1938, he leaves Cambridge and heads to Princeton University in the United States.
His time at Princeton is fascinating because he goes there specifically to study under Alonzo Church. What makes this significant is that just before Turing published his paper on the Turing machine, Alonzo Church had published his own paper reaching the exact same conclusion about the Scheiding's problem.
So they were parallel thinking across the ocean. But they used very different methods, didn't they?
Entirely different. While Turing used the mechanical thought experiment of the tape and the scanner, Church used a highly abstract, purely mathematical system called lambda calculus.
For those of us who don't dream in equations, how do we conceptualize lambda calculus compared to a Turing machine?
Think of it this way. A Turing machine is focused on states and sequences. It's like a worker on an assembly line moving a product down a conveyor belt, making one change at a time based on a strict set of rules.
Okay, I see that.
Lambda calculus, on the other hand, is entirely based on functions. It treats computation as a cascading series of functions, taking other functions as inputs. It doesn't care about the sequence of moving left or right. It cares about the mathematical transformation of data.
So if lambda calculus is like a complex plumbing system where water flows through various filters and valves simultaneously, the Turing machine is a guy with a bucket walking back and forth. But ultimately, they both move the water to the exact same destination.
That analogy holds up incredibly well. And working together at Princeton, their two approaches merge into what is fundamentally known today as the Church-Turing thesis.
Right.
This thesis essentially states that anything that can be naturally calculated, any function that is computable in the physical universe, can be computed by a Turing machine or by lambda calculus. They had effectively drawn the absolute outer boundaries of computation.
But the sources point out something really interesting about Turing's time at Princeton. He wasn't just sitting in an ivory tower thinking about infinite paper takes and abstract calculus. He actually spent time studying cryptology, and he built physical hardware.
He did.
He constructed 3 out of 4 stages of an electromechanical binary multiplier.
This detail provides a crucial window into Turing's overall methodology. He was never satisfied with just being a pure theorist who stayed in the clouds of abstract logic. He had a deep, tactile desire to physically build the things he imagined.
Yeah.
He understood that Boolean logic, the ones and zeros of his theoretical tape, could be physically manifested in the real world using relays and electrical currents.
Right, a relay is just an electromagnet that opens or closes a physical switch. If the switch is closed and electricity flows, that's a 1. If it's open and no electricity flows, that's a 0. Turing was literally building physical logic gates to multiply binary numbers together.
Which demonstrates that he was already bridging the gap between his 1936 theoretical paper and the actual engineering of computers. And simultaneously, he is working on his PhD dissertation under Church, which was titled Systems of Logic Based on Ordinals. In this dissertation, he pushes past the boundaries he had just established.
Okay, what does he do?
He introduces a concept he calls oracles.
This is where theoretical computer science starts sounding like science fiction. Remember, he had just proven with the halting problem that there are specific limits to what a Turing machine can do. There are problems it cannot solve. So for his PhD, he imagines taking a standard Turing machine and plugging it into a theoretical black box.
In mathematical terms, an oracle is an imaginary entity that is capable of solving an uncomputable problem, like the halting problem, in a single, instantaneous step.
Boom, just like that.
Turing wasn't concerned with how the oracle did it, whether it was magic, quantum mechanics, or divine intervention. It was entirely outside the bounds of traditional algorithms. Turing wanted to explore what kind of mathematics would be possible if you had an algorithmic machine augmented by an uncomputable truth teller.
He's saying, okay, the algorithmic machine has strict logical limits, but what if we plug a gut instinct into the machine?
Exactly.
The philosophical implications of this are staggering, especially when we look at artificial intelligence today. Are human beings just complex Turing machines running biological algorithms, or do we possess some form of intuition, some quantum leap in reasoning that acts as an oracle? Are humans the oracles?
It is a profound debate in cognitive science today. Turing was exploring the absolute theoretical edge of where mechanical logic meets the unexplainable unknown.
But that theoretical edge was about to smash headfirst into a very brutal, visceral, physical reality. Because Turing completes his PhD, returns to the UK, and very shortly after, World War II breaks out.
Yeah. The transition from the halls of Princeton to the existential necessity of a global war is incredibly stark. On September 4th, 1939, literally the day after the UK declared war on Germany, Alan Turing reports for duty at Bletchley Park.
Bletchley Park was the headquarters for Britain's code-breaking operations. Now, we could easily spend an entire series of deep dives just on his war work.
Yeah.
The sources detail his leadership in Hut 8, cracking the German naval Enigma code, which was suffocating the Atlantic shipping lanes.
Right.
But keeping our focus on the evolution of computing, Bletchley Park acts as the crucible. It is the place where his theoretical paper tapes were forced into physical, war-winning reality.
A prime example of this is the bombe. Within weeks of arriving at Bletchley, Turing had specified the design for this machine. The bombe was not a general-purpose computer like his theoretical universal machine. It was a massive, clattering, room-size electromechanical machine specifically designed to attack the Enigma.
The Germans thought Enigma was unbreakable because it changed its encryption settings every single day, offering millions and billions of possible configurations. The bombe didn't try to guess the right setting by brute force. I mean, there wasn't enough time in the universe for that. Instead, it used logical deductions based on what codebreakers called cribs.
A crib is a fragment of known or highly suspected plaintext. For instance, the codebreakers might guess that a specific encrypted message sent at 6 a.m. every day contained the phrase Wettervorhersage, German for weather forecast.
So Turing designed the bombe to take that crib and electronically test it against possible Enigma rotor settings. But the genius was that the machine was looking for contradictions.
Right.
If a setting led to a logical impossibility, like an A encrypting to an A, which the Enigma physically could not do, the bombe threw that setting out and moved to the next one. It eliminated the impossible at lightning speed until only the truth remained.
And beyond the hardware, Turing was pioneering new applications of probability. He developed statistical procedures called Banburismus and Turindery. Van Burismus, for example, used sequential analysis to infer information about the Enigma rotor settings.
Okay.
Turing actually invented a new unit of measurement called the ban and the deciband to measure the weight of evidence in favor of a particular setting.
He was using Bayesian statistics to measure the probability of truth. By scoring different settings, he could drastically reduce the number of configurations the bombs had to test, saving hundreds of hours of computing time. It was human intelligence optimizing mechanical logic.
And the scale of this operation grew exponentially. Eventually, they had hundreds of bombs running. And a significant reason for that expansion was Turing's willingness to bypass the bureaucracy.
Oh yeah, I love this part.
When Bletchley was starved for staff and resources, Turing and a few colleagues wrote a direct, blunt letter to Prime Minister Winston Churchill pleading for help.
The famous Action This Day memo. Churchill read it, recognized the immense value of the intelligence, and immediately ordered his chief of staff to make sure they had everything they wanted on an extreme priority basis. The official war historian, Harry Hinsley, later estimated that the intelligence produced at Bletchley Park shortened the war in Europe by more than 2 years and saved millions of lives.
But as incredible as the war work was, for the specific history of computing, it's what happens after the war that completes the arc from his 1936 paper. The war had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that large-scale, automated electronic computation was not only physically possible, but vital.
The abstract ideas from the 1930s now had thousands of miles of wire, relays, and vacuum tubes to back them up. Between 1945 and 1947, Turing works at the National Physical Laboratory. And here he designed something called the ACE, the Automatic Computing Engine. In 1946, he presents a paper that outlines the first detailed design of a stored program computer.
The term stored program is the key here. The bombs at Bletchley and other early wartime computers like ENIAC in America had to be physically rewired by operators with massive cables to change their function. The ACE, however, was designed to store its software instructions internally in its electronic memory.
Which is exactly the physical manifestation of his theoretical universal machine. The hardware remains static, but the program stored in the memory changes the machine's entire identity. But Turing hits a massive wall here.
Yeah, he was hampered by the Official Secrets Act. His practical, hands-on experience building massive computing networks at Bletchley Park was highly classified.
Of course.
When he tried to explain to the engineers at the NPL how he knew these electronic systems would work and scale, he couldn't legally tell them about his wartime successes. They viewed him as a pure theoretician and didn't trust his engineering designs, leading to immense delays.
He was a man living in the future, practically gagged by the secrets of the past. But he doesn't stop innovating. He eventually moves to the University of Manchester, where the first actual stored program computer had been successfully fired up. And here, having solved the hardware problem, he starts tackling what might be his most famous philosophical contribution. In 1950, he publishes a seminal paper titled Computing Machinery and Intelligence.
This is the paper that introduces what we now call the Turing test. He opens the paper by asking a seemingly simple but deeply loaded question: can machines think?
Such a big question.
But Turing recognized that thinking is a slippery, subjective, almost theological concept. How do you define consciousness? So he proposes replacing the philosophical debate with a practical, pragmatic experiment.
He calls it the imitation game.
The setup is straightforward. You have a human judge communicating via text, say, typing on a keyboard, with two entities hidden in the other rooms. One is a human being and the other is a computer program. The judge can ask any questions they want. If, after a lengthy conversation, the judge cannot reliably tell which entity is the human and which is the machine, then Turing argues that, for all practical purposes, the machine is demonstrating intelligence.
It is such a brilliant, pragmatic bypass of the consciousness debate. He's essentially saying, does it really matter if the machine has a soul or internal subjective experience? If it can flawlessly simulate human thought to the point that a human cannot tell the difference, then we have to treat it as thinking. And this is where I found a detail in the sources that just absolutely blows my mind about Turing's dedication to this concept. He wasn't just writing philosophical thought experiments. He was actively trying to program a machine to play chess.
Yes, the Turing program. He began writing this in 1948 with his colleague D.G. Champernowne. They were trying to encode the complex heuristics of chess into algorithms.
But the punchline to this story is incredible. In 1948, a computer powerful enough to actually run his chess program did not exist yet. The hardware hadn't caught up to his software.
He had written the code for a machine that was still a ghost.
So what does he do? In 1952, he decides he wants to test if the program actually works against a human opponent. Since he doesn't have a computer, he literally becomes the computer himself.
Right.
He acts as the human CPU. He sits at a chessboard opposite a colleague, and for every single move, he refuses to use his own human chess intuition. Instead, he manually flips through his notebook of algorithms, calculating the logic step by step to see what the Turochamp program dictates he should do.
It took him about half an hour to calculate each move. And this story perfectly, beautifully demonstrates the core concept of the universal machine from 1936.
How so?
The machine is not the metal, the vacuum tubes, or the silicon. The machine is the execution of the algorithm. Whether that algorithm is running on an electronic mainframe or on the biological brain of Alan Turing turning pages in a notebook, the logic is fundamentally universal. The hardware is completely irrelevant to the computation.
That is profound. He made his own biological mechanism act as the machine to prove the software worked. And in that same 1950 paper on intelligence, he makes a highly prescient observation about how we might actually achieve this kind of artificial intelligence. He recognized that trying to program an adult mind with millions of lines of code detailing every single rule of the world was a fool's errand.
He suggested a completely different paradigm. He wrote that it would be better to produce a simpler program that simulates a child's mind and then subject it to a rigorous course of education. Let the machine learn.
He essentially predicted the entire modern field of machine learning and neural networks. Instead of top-down programming with rigid rules, he proposed bottom-up training through experience, reward, and punishment. He saw the exact trajectory of AI decades before we had the computing power to actually implement it.
He saw the algorithmic nature of intelligence. And in his final years, he takes this universal theory of computation, this ability to see the logic underlying reality, and he points it at the ultimate complex system, nature itself. Having written the code for machines, he begins looking for the code of biological life.
This brings us to a deeply fascinating phase of his career. In 1951, he pivots toward mathematical biology. And in 1952, he publishes a masterpiece called The Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis. Now, morphogenesis is the study of how patterns and shapes develop in biological organisms. It asks questions like, why does a zebra have stripes? Why does a leopard have spots? How do the leaves of a plant know to grow in a perfect Fibonacci sequence?
To the casual observer, a leopard's spots just look like the messy, chaotic, beautiful randomness of nature. But to Turing, looking at biology through the lens of a universal machine, he didn't see chaos. He saw a program running. He saw an algorithm dictating the placement of pigment.
And he proposed a mathematical model to explain it called a reaction diffusion system.
He suggested that patterns in nature are created by chemicals interacting or reacting with each other while simultaneously diffusing or spreading out across a space like an embryo's skin.
Can you break that down?
Sure, to simplify it, he imagined two specific chemicals. Let's call the first one an activator, or catalyst, which encourages a pattern, like dark pigment, to grow. The second chemical is an inhibitor, which stops the pigment from forming.
So it's like an accelerator and a brake pedal competing for control of the biological car.
Exactly. Turing modeled this interaction using incredibly complex nonlinear differential equations. He discovered mathematically that if the activator chemical diffuses slowly through the tissue, but the inhibitor chemical diffuses very quickly, they interact to create standing waves of chemical concentration.
Interesting.
The activator creates a spot of dark color, but it also triggers the fast-moving inhibitor, which rushes out and surrounds the spot, preventing the color from spreading further. The result is a stable, recurring pattern. Spots, stripes, spirals, all emerging from pure mathematical rules.
But again, just like with his chess program, he lacked a computer powerful enough to fully simulate these nonlinear equations. So he had to use linear approximations and painstakingly solve them by hand. Did the math hold up in the real world?
It absolutely did. The source material highlights a remarkable validation of this work. In 2023, 70 years after Turing published his paper, researchers experimentally confirmed his exact mathematical model using living vegetation.
Wait, in 2023?
Yeah, a study published by the American Physical Society involved growing chia seeds in perfectly even layers. By carefully tweaking the moisture levels based strictly on Turing's reaction diffusion equations, the patterns of the germinating seeds emerged exactly as his math predicted.
He had literally decoded the mathematical blueprint of life.
Yeah.
He was peering into the source code of nature. But, and this is where the story of his life takes a devastating, tragic turn while I was busy decoding the physical laws of life, the rigid, arbitrary laws of the society he lived in decided to destroy his.
It is a profound historical tragedy. In January 1952, Turing's house in Wilmslow was burgled. During the routine police investigation of the burglary, Turing, who was generally open and naive about his private life, acknowledged to the detectives that he was having a sexual relationship with a 19-year-old man named Arnold Murray, who actually knew the burglar.
In 1952 in the United Kingdom, homosexual acts were strictly criminal offenses.
Under Section 11 of the Criminal Law Amendment Act 1885, both Turing and Murray were charged with gross indecency.
Powerful.
Turing did not deny the charges. He did not feel he had done anything morally wrong. However, on the advice of his brother and his solicitor, he entered a plea of guilty to avoid a drawn-out, highly publicized trial.
The sentence he received was barbaric. The court gave him a choice between imprisonment and probation. But the probation came with a horrific medical condition attached to it. He had to agree to undergo a series of hormonal physical changes, effectively chemical castration.
He was subjected to a year-long treatment of estrogen injections, specifically a synthetic hormone called DES. The intent of the state was to reduce his libido, but the physical effects were severe. The treatment rendered him impotent, caused breast tissue to form, and physically feminized his body.
Furthermore, the conviction had immediate, catastrophic professional consequences. Because homosexuality was viewed by the government as a critical security risk, there was a pervasive Cold War panic that homosexuals were highly susceptible to Soviet blackmail. His security clearance was immediately stripped away. He was barred from continuing his highly classified cryptographic consultancy with GCHQ.
He wrote to a friend during this period, stating with a tragic sort of resignation, "No doubt I shall emerge from it all a different man, but quite who I've not found out. The rigidity of the legal system utterly crushed the mechanism of the mind that had helped save the nation from tyranny during the war."
The man who built systems to defeat authoritarianism was broken by the authoritarian laws of his own home. And this leads to June 8, 1954. Alan Turing is found dead in his bed by his housekeeper. He was only 41 years old.
The official post-mortem determined the cause of death to be cyanide poisoning. An apple lay half-eaten on the bedside table.
Right.
The inquest ruled it a suicide, and it has long been the accepted narrative that he consumed a fatal dose of cyanide by lacing that apple. Several biographers have noted his intense fascination with the Walt Disney film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, specifically the scene where the Wicked Queen dips the apple in the poison brew.
It paints a very specific theatrical picture of his death. But the sources we are using also highlight alternative theories that challenge the suicide ruling. His mother, for instance, vehemently denied he took his own life.
Philosopher and Turing scholar Jack Copeland has presented compelling evidence suggesting the death may have been accidental. Copeland points out that Turing had a chemical apparatus set up in his spare room to electroplate gold onto spoons. This specific process required the use of potassium cyanide. Copeland suggests that Turing could have accidentally inhaled lethal cyanide fumes from this makeshift laboratory.
Copeland also notes that Turing had borne the hormone treatment, which had actually ended a year prior to his death, with good humor, and that he had left a to-do list of tasks on his desk for after the upcoming holiday weekend. The exact circumstances of his death will likely always remain debated, but the immense premature loss to human scientific progress is undeniable.
It took decades for the British government to officially reckon with the damage they inflicted. In 2009, following a massive public petition, Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued an official public apology on behalf of the government, describing Turing's treatment as appalling. In 2013, Queen Elizabeth II granted a rare posthumous royal pardon.
And that pardon eventually paved the way for the Alan Turing Law in 2017, which was an amnesty law that retroactively pardoned tens of thousands of other men who had been cautioned or convicted under those same historical discriminatory laws.
Which brings us to the conclusion of this exploration. The arc of Turing's life and work is almost difficult to fully comprehend because of its scale. We started with a grieving schoolboy looking at the stars, writing letters about where his friend's spirit went when the physical mechanism of the body failed.
That profound grief over Christopher Morcom drove him to ask the most fundamental questions about matter and thought. Those questions led him to break the boundaries of mathematics in 1936, inventing the universal Turing machine. The revolutionary concept that a single physical device, a blank slate, could become any machine simply by reading an algorithm printed on a tape. He proved that the hardware is just the vessel. The logic, the software, is universal.
He then used that rigorous logic to build the bombs that broke the Enigma codes, optimizing mechanical searches with Bayesian probability. He designed the architecture for the first stored program computers. He conceptualized the Turing test, fundamentally shifting how we define artificial intelligence, and predicted the necessity of machine learning. And finally, he used his universal logic to read the chemical algorithms of biology itself.
Think about the AI models that are dominating our headlines today. Remember Turing's 1950 paper where he suggested building a child machine and letting it learn? The massive language models we interact with today aren't programmed with millions of hard-coded rules about grammar or facts. They are essentially child machines that have absorbed the entire text of the internet to learn how to speak, how to reason, and how to simulate thought.
Exactly.
We are currently living inside the architecture of Turing's grandest experiment.
But there is one final piece of his work that remains unresolved. What about his PhD dissertation? The concept of the oracles.
Oh, right.
If Turing's oracles, machines, or systems capable of intuitively solving the uncomputable, leaping beyond the bounds of standard step-by-step algorithms, are the next evolutionary step in computation, where might they come from? Could the very nature he tried to decode with his morphogenesis equations, the biological chemical algorithms of the universe, hold the blueprint for the quantum supercomputers of tomorrow?
It brings us right back to the beginning of our conversation. We like our machines to be single-purpose, clean, and predictable. But Alan Turing looked at the raw materials of the universe and saw an infinite blank tape. He saw that with the right instructions, the machine isn't locked to its hardware. The machine can be anything. It can even perhaps be a mind.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source code of the modern world.